Hey guys, Metal Jesus here, and I am back with a most anticipated review of the brand new Analogue 3D. This is a Nintendo 64 clone system based on FPGA technology, and it has taken a while to get here. People pre-ordered this a while ago, and there's been several delays for it to come out, but it's finally here in my game room. I've been messing around with it for several weeks. I've thrown a bunch of games at it, and I'm going to show you all of that in this video, including some multiplayer, which is pretty fun to do. And I'll talk about some of the quirks and things I ran into with this. A couple things didn't work quite as well as I would have hoped, but let's go ahead and get started. Let's go ahead and jump into what's included in the box. So you have the Analogue 3D gaming console, and like I said, this is FPGA based, and it's designed to play your physical Nintendo 64 game cartridges. Pre-installed on it is a 16 gigabyte SD card, which I assume is going to be used to do firmware upgrades. It comes with an HDMI cable as well as a USB cable and a worldwide USB-C power supply, which is very nice. And I was surprised to see 2 cartridge cleaners included in the box, which actually turned out to be very handy. And for this review, they also sent along 4 8-bit DOE 64 controllers so that we could test multiplayer. So these controllers are really nice. 8-bit DOE has been making fantastic controllers for quite a while now, and these are compatible with the Analogue 3D. You can also use them on your Switch and Windows and Android. They have D input and S input modes, and it supports vibration, and those little thumbsticks there are Hall effect, which is great. And these controllers have buttons mapped at the top that will let you bring in the in-game menu. You can also cycle through different display modes. You can select rumble or controller pack, and also you can exit out to the main OS menu. Now let's go ahead and get into the main features of this. So the first thing is it's running 3D OS, which is their own operating system, and it's very similar to some of the other devices, but it's specifically made for this one, and they're going to keep adding onto it through firmware upgrades as the life of this product goes on. It has built-in expansion pack support, which is that memory module that most people who had an original N64 would want, because a lot of games would detect it and give you higher resolution or, better frame rates, and I'll show that running. It supports Bluetooth, both classic and LE, and so LE is low energy technology that basically allows for ultra low power communication between devices. It's an N64 clone system, so it has to support multiplayer, and so there is 4-player support here, both wireless and wired, and you see on the front that you can also plug in your original N64 controllers if you want. There are 2 USB-A ports built into this, and you can use that to charge your wireless controllers or plug in, like, say, a wired Xbox 360 controller if you prefer to use that. Moving on to the video, this will output via HDMI 4K 60, which is great. It supports all regions, so you can play the entire Nintendo 64 catalog on this thing, and they are going for lag-free, zero signal degradation here. That's the goal with this. And what's interesting with this, I hadn't seen this in any other system I've tested before, is that it supports ultra low latency mode. And essentially what it will do is send a signal to your HD television to automatically put the TV in game mode. So they do that so that you have the lowest amount of lag possible, which I thought was pretty cool. And it has a bunch of different display modes. You can make it look like a CRT or a BVM, which is one of those broadcast quality monitors that a lot of people are looking for. And the goal of this is to play all of your original N64 game cartridges regardless of region, and also be able to use your original controllers and accessories. I like it. I think it looks pretty cool. It's like they captured the essence of the original N64, which I think is one of the best looking consoles ever made. I love that little hump, that little swoop that they got there, but it's smaller, more compact. So I dig it quite a bit. Now let's go ahead and get into the games. And this is where I had to pause for a second and think, how do I want to review this? Because let's be honest, most people who want to play N64 games today probably already have a solution to do so, right? You can emulate them on a computer, or you can buy a Mister and run them on that, or you can be like me, where perhaps you years ago modded your original N64 to do HDMI out, right? That was a great way back then to be able to output it to a modern television, also to be able to capture the footage. And I've had that for probably 7 years now. Or there's other solutions out there to play your physical cartridges like the Polymega. And so for this video, I really focused on the solutions that play physical media. So I compared the Analogue 3D directly to my modded N64 and the Polymega to decide, is it worth existing in this market right now? Now, they all use obviously different solutions and technologies, but again, 2 of these solutions already exist. And so I wanted to see how the Analogue compares to those. It's better than I expected it to be. I was skeptical, like a lot of people. It's been years in the making. There's been significant delays, and up until launch, there wasn't a lot of footage of games running on it. And so there wasn't a lot of confidence. However, Analogue in the past has made great clone systems, and as far as I can tell, this does a lot of things right, and just a few things that I would probably tweak. Starting with, it worked with pretty much every physical cartridge I threw at it. Even cartridges that my real N64 didn't detect. So I'm not sure what they're doing here with this device, but the cartridge pins seem to be very good. There is one exception to this, and it's the first thing I tried, and people are going to ask about it down in the comments, and that is, will it work with the Everdrive? And the answer is, maybe. It turns out that it might work if you have an older version of the Everdrive. But if you have a newer one like I have the X7 that has more features built into it, it does not work at all. It doesn't detect it. It doesn't know what to do with it, even though the Everdrive does work in my real N64. So I reached out to Analogue about this. It turns out that they just basically really focused on physical game cartridges and didn't really mess around too much with Everdrives. That said, this might be something that they can build in and support in the future. But as of right now, depending on the Everdrive you have, it may or may not work. And so that was the one lone exception of what it didn't support. And not everybody's going to care, but some people will, like myself. The other thing that you've probably already noticed about the footage here is that by default, when you put in a game cartridge, the display mode is set to BVM, which is that really high-end monitor that a lot of people would love to have. And Analogue feels like that's the best representation of the Nintendo 64 games on a modern system. So that's why they set that as the default. However, you don't have to use that, so you can quickly change that on the fly and choose things like, PVM or CRT scan lines, or just leave it completely clean if you want to. And you can set that per game or system-wide in the settings as the default. And I thought this to be kind of curious because most clone systems don't do this, but those 3D graphics on the N64, they're kind of rough by today's standards. And we all played it back with real CRTs, and so they are betting that this is the memory that most people have. But like I said, you don't have to use these at all. You can completely change them, but I just wanted to mention that. And by the way, each of these has a bunch of specific settings that you can really tweak to your liking. Another thing I thought was kind of curious is that under hardware settings, they have this thing called Advanced Hardware Experimental, which is off by default. However, you can go into individual cartridges and turn this on. And what it allows you to do is do different levels of overclock on that hardware to potentially make the games run smoother. I immediately noticed better performance on arcade racing games like Revolt, which frankly doesn't run that great on stock N64 hardware. So suddenly that game became way more playable, way more pleasant. I suspect the reason why this is experimental and currently optional is because it's notoriously difficult to emulate the Nintendo 64. And throwing this type of technology in there could probably mess up all sorts of game code. So they probably want to get this out in the wild, have more people playing it, testing it, getting further into games before they commit to it or tweak it a little bit more. But in my testing with arcade racing games, I almost always wanted to have it on, and I didn't notice anything wrong with it. I mentioned that this fully supports the expansion pack or the memory upgrade, and every game that I tried with it correctly identified it and then gave me that enhanced option. So for example, in the Indiana Jones game, it detects the extra RAM and then it gives you a higher resolution of the game, which is pretty nice.
Funny how I didn't spot this before. If this is the prize, I'll lose my grant for sure. Where are the priceless artifacts? The gilded idols, the crowns of kings.
Of course, we got to compare the audio in these games, and so let's listen to a couple examples here.
Destroy generators to stop energy. Destroy generators to stop energy. Save keys to open doors and chests.
And of course, the N64 is great with multiplayer, and so I happened to have a couple friends over at the house, Dan and Elisa, and we were playing a bunch of multiplayer games here. Using those 8-bit DOE controllers is super easy. There's a sync button on the front of the console and a sync button on the controller itself. You push it and you're connected within a couple seconds, and it's great because they are designed to be used with it. So all the buttons are mapped correctly. Each one of them can bring up the menu. It's awesome. And the controllers themselves are pretty interesting. They're kind of a mix of the original N64 controller and maybe like the Switch Pro controller. So they're more compact, more comfortable, and specifically the thumbstick is not as high. So again, that's a little bit more easier to use in games. The other thing I want to address, I know somebody's going to ask in the comments, does it happen to work with the disk drive? Yeah, no. And I didn't expect it to anyways. The issue being is that a real N64 has that port on the bottom of it and it attaches to the disk drive. But let's be honest, I mean, it was a flop in Japan. Now, I happen to have the US prototype here in my game collection, and there's like, 7 games released for it, so I didn't expect it to support it in any way, but I wanted to address it because, I mean, wouldn't it have been wild if it did? That'd be hilarious, right? So, what do I think? Well, I gotta be honest, it's better than I expected. Again, there were so many delays with this, and very little information came out about it. And so a lot of people are like, oh, I don't know, Analogue's in trouble with this one. And I kind of expected that to be the case. But in my testing, now I didn't test everything, obviously, and I can't put hundreds of hours into games here. I didn't really run into much, and I threw a bunch of games at it that I thought would be fairly difficult to run. I threw some notoriously difficult games to emulate at this, like Gauntlet Legends and Extreme G2 Racing. Both of those games are, tough to kind of get running on some systems. Also, Dark Rift is another one. Star Wars Shadows of the Empire, Turok 2, a bunch of that sort of stuff. I also happen to have a couple physical Japanese releases that I also popped in here, and Smash Brothers, the Japanese version, ran fine on it as far as I can tell. Not a great Smash Brothers player, but it looked fine to me. But also I threw Bomberman 2 at it, and again, that seemed to be running okay. I don't own any PAL region cartridges to test with, and this is where the Everdrive would have been nice to be able to use to do some of that testing with. So I don't know if 50 Hertz N64 games, work on it or not. I have no idea. They say they support them, so I assume that they would. But overall, I'm impressed with this. I mean, it does what it set out to do, and I do suspect that as these get into the hands of consumers and customers, that probably some issues will come up. Almost every clone system runs into that a little bit. The good news is Analogue is very good about pushing out firmware upgrades. So, as bugs are discovered, they will update their consoles, which is great. But I would love to know what you guys think. Did you order the Analogue 3D, or do you already have a Nintendo 64 solution? Let me know down in the comments. As always, guys, I want to thank you for watching my channel. Thank you for subscribing, and take care.